Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Dr. John Nieters. He is a functional medicine practitioner and traditional Chinese medicine doctor. He's also a speaker, radio show host. Welcome to the show, Dr.
Good
John.
morning, AJ. This is great. Thank you.
You are well.
Well, I want to thank you for the invite, for one thing. There's several things about your show that I was really excited when I saw that I was going to be a guest. One, I was really impressed by the quality of some of the other people you've interviewed, so that made me feel good. And I like your interviewing style. You really allow people to tell their story, and you're a great interviewer. And the third thing is, as you mentioned, I did live radio call-in health talk show for 10 years, over 500 episodes. And so people would literally call from all over the world. I remember Tatiana was one of my favorites from Moscow, but I had a very large following in India. And in fact, some of the people that listened to the radio show actually came over to the United States for me to treat them. And so this is really exciting for me to kind of circle back around. And maybe, some of those people are listening. So it's exciting. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, Dr. John. Thank you for your connection with India. It matters a lot to us. We keep an eye on the world, and we also listen to all those voices. And all those voices who can resonate with us, we certainly would like to reach out to them. So that's the way, earlier in the old days, we used to listen to a lot of these shows in radio, Ceylon, all those things. And a lot of people, still have those old memories. As for my interview style, I can tell you I was born in a village, and it was my parents, who gave me good education in spite of being born in a village with no electricity, nothing. But
Wow.
I was able to read. At one point in time, I told them when I was in class 1 or 2 that I don't want to go to the school. And in an Indian way, they made me understand I need to go to the school. And if I had dropped out, I would never be talking to great people like you. So that's the only thing I carry. The understanding of the winds, the rivers that I was born around, and the love of a lot of people in my small town. That makes me. And so because you talked about that makes me, that makes me feel, rather than speaking, rather to listen about all those things. And that has been a part of me. That is the reason you have been a radio show call-in, 500 call-in radio shows plus. So you know what I mean in that sense. And that is where I'm happy that God gave me, at least a chance to reinvigorate whatever I was doing in journalism, and that has translated into what I do a bit in terms of podcasting. And it's a great fortune to be able to talk to great people like you, Dr. John.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. John. So let's talk about, as we said, we'll be talking about a lot about Eastern and Western medicine. In this backdrop, we will learn about how one can transform their health by using the best of all sort of things that are available. And in that, first, let's understand. You talked a bit about you, but let me just get a bit more about you, your background, your journey, so that the audience learns a bit more about, who they are listening to, Dr. John.
Excellent. I was a very poor student in college for my first few years, at least. It wasn't really until I went back to get my master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine that I actually learned how to study and be a good student. I was a bright kid, so I could pass tests, but I didn't really understand. But I got interested in traditional Chinese medicine. I'd gone to the University of California in Santa Barbara. I'd been a high school athlete, played 4 sports. I went to Santa Barbara and became a total couch potato. All I was doing is drinking beer and eating potato chips. And so one day I got up, went with some friends, and we had a rousing game of ping pong. I blew out 2 discs in my back playing ping pong because I was in such horrible condition. So they took me to student health and they said, yeah, you have to have surgery. So I got a second opinion and they said, yeah, you have to have surgery. And, AJ, I had one friend. I don't even know why we were such good friends, but most of my friends at that time were athletes, right? That's what I did. And this guy was the exception, very eclectic. He was president of the chess club. He was president of the physics club, just all these things that I never, ever thought of doing. And so I told him I was going to have surgery. And he said, well, why don't you try acupuncture? Now, this is in the early 1970s, right? And I said, what the blank is acupuncture? And he said, remember the Kung Fu TV show where they stick needles in people? I said, I'm not going to let someone stick needles in me. And he said, oh, so you're going to let a surgeon take a scalpel and carve up your spine? And I said, maybe I will try that acupuncture. So I found this brilliant older gentleman in Berkeley. And he was a Qigong master and a Tai Chi master, as well as really a master herbalist, more than acupuncture. And, he interviewed me, we talked, and he said, you don't need surgery. You just come start doing my Tai Chi class and Qigong, and I'll give you some herbs and you'll be fine. And then he changed my diet completely, gave me a few other recommendations, which I followed. And only 2 days in my life have I ever written anything in a journal. And one of those days was after meeting this brilliant man. And basically what this journal entry said is, I want to be just like him. So I started studying Tai Chi and Qigong, and I still was not a good student at that point. But then a few years later, I met the person who was to become my mentor, and I apprenticed to Master Peter Ralston, who was a world martial arts champion in 1978. And he credited his winning all of his fights to his meditation, to his ontological study. And so that's what I started studying. And it completely changed my life working with him. Now, I knew I wanted to become an acupuncturist, but I was married, had several children. I owned a real estate company, and I couldn't really make the transition. And then, for better or for worse, I got divorced. And now I was freed up, and I went back to get my master's degree, and it was the best thing ever. Now, I dabbled. I have studied with one brilliant Ayurvedic teacher. She was just amazing. I loved Ayurveda. There isn't any licensure in the United States for Ayurveda. And Chinese medicine Ayurveda, just, they're speaking in different languages, but the information, the context is the same, really. And they've, interacted for thousands of years. So I decided to do Chinese medicine. And then I had an amazing experience about 25 years ago. I did a course, a weekend course with a fellow that I consider my mentor named Jake Fratkin. And Jake was teaching a class. He was an acupuncturist, but he was teaching a class in functional medicine for the gut. Talked a lot about leaky gut problems and what is now called SIBO, bacterial overgrowth, et cetera. They didn't have those names 25 years ago, but it just totally blew me out of the water. It was like I'd been reawakened, and I saw the inherent beauty in Ayurveda, in Chinese medicine, in functional medicine, which is to keep you healthy, right? If you're sick, we want to help you, right? We want to get you out of your stage of sickness, but really, we don't want you to get sick in the first place. And that's what all of those practices really have in common, right? And so that's what turned my life around. Now, what happened that is having me get on your show was that, it's one thing to know intellectually, and then it's another completely different thing to really practice what you preach. And I was giving great advice to my patients. They were doing well, but I wasn't following my own advice. And so I started to slip deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's kind of that slippery slope, right? I became diabetic. I'm board certified in treating diabetes from China, but I became diabetic. I was shocked when I realized that. But then I started to develop a whole range of other problems. I'd had atrial fibrillation, irregular heartbeat for 40 years, but I was able to control it with herbs very well. But then it became something called atrial flutter. And an atrial flutter, the cells of the heart that aren't supposed to be sending out electrical signals start sending out electrical signals. So I was in a local supermarket. I passed out, and I knew there was something wrong because I was lying face to face with a container of hummus, and I knew that wasn't appropriate. So, I was a football player when I was younger, and you never show you're injured. So I popped up, right, which was really stupid. And I said, I'm fine. But they called the ambulance, took me in. They did an EKG of my heart. It was really packed in the emergency room. And so I saw this young physician's assistant take the reading from the EKG over to this really stressed out young doctor. And they both looked up at me. And he looked at her and shook his head, just shook his head no. And okay, that's fine. Then they released me. Well, it wasn't until I got my records from the emergency room that I found that the lower chambers of my heart, the ventricles, were beating at 72 beats a minute. The upper chambers, the atria, were beating at 288 beats a minute. That's not good. I mean, as you know, they're all supposed to be beating in synchrony. And so I also had severe gout last year. I could barely walk. I had a walker. In fact, I have 4 walkers now, 3 that I got from my hospital visits. And I bought the best walker you can find. It's gorgeous. And thank goodness I haven't needed it for a year. But I just decided that I was tired of using those old hospital walkers. So I was in bad shape, really bad shape, with the gout. I was diabetic. I had severe heart arrhythmias and I had prostate problems. I had a whole litany of issues, but it all came to a head December, almost a little over a year ago. And I decided to have a catheter ablation. That's where they go through the groin up into the heart and they blast those cells. They superheat them or use electricity to kill the cells that are sending out the erratic signals. Okay, it worked fine. It was brilliant. But I was 72 years old, and they had to keep me under anesthesia a lot longer than they anticipated. And so what happens with older people, when they're under anesthesia too long, the lungs can collapse. And that's what happened to me. And so I'm sitting there watching a movie with my son, who was home from college for the holidays, and my wife. And every few minutes, I realized I was having a harder time breathing. And it got to the point finally where I said, honey, I hate to do this. I need to go to the emergency room. And so they drove me. Fortunately, I knew which hospital to go to. I didn't go back to the emergency room that I went to before. And so, but it was fascinating. AJ, as I was driving over, as I was being driven over, I kept singing this song to myself. It just came into my head, and it was by one of my favorite musicians, but it was, he was dying of lung cancer, and he went on the David Letterman show, and they devoted a whole show to him, Warren Zevon. And one of the last songs he wrote with all of his very famous musician buddies, it was like, it says, the shadows are falling and I'm running out of breath. Keep me in your heart for a while, right? And so I kept singing that in my head all the way to the hospital. So I get there, they rush me in. I was in congestive heart failure and pneumonia. And so they hooked me up. I got incredible care, tremendous care, very loving doctors and nurses. So I was in for 4 days and I got released. But during that time, I had quite an awakening, I'm going to say, for lack of a better term. It's like, what am I doing here? My purpose isn't done. I have a lot to do and I'm wasting my life. And so I renewed my commitment to my health, and largely because I wanted to be an example for my patients and for other people. And so I set out and I said, okay, I'm clear about my purpose. I'm going to create the intention to turn all of this around in 4 months. Now, that's a pretty bold thing, but I was very committed. Now, this is where the integration comes in. Western medicine has some brilliant things they can do, right? I could not have healed my heart. You know, I'm pretty good at a lot of things. That one, when the heart's doing that, the only thing that was going to work was the ablation. When I got the pneumonia and I couldn't breathe, Western medicine has the best emergency treatments for that. But then they just let me go. and no suggestions, no advice, no anything. And fortunately, I had done many years of teaching qigong and tai chi, so I knew how to do that, and I had a lot of experience in meditation. So I started doing that again, reawaken those practices, and again, being a functional medical person and also a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, I knew the herbs and supplements to take. No, I'd known all the time. I just wasn't doing it. And so, of course, I had severe inflammation in my arteries from all that work and from the inflammation. And so I took Chinese herbs for that and some supplements for that. Fortunately, there's some incredible supplements that have just come on the market for inflammation in the blood vessels. So I did that. And so I was feeling okay, but I had no energy. I had no drive. And so I realized that being 72 years old, that I needed to get back into the gym, right? So I started going to the gym. And the key there is partnership. So last year, I wrote a book with a woman that I work with called The Sweet Spot, which is about reading lab values in a much different way, a much narrower range than what is done by most medical doctors. And so I asked her if she wanted to work out, and she said, yeah. So I didn't trust myself to work out in the afternoon. So she would come over at 5:30 in the morning, walk her dog over, leave her dog to play with my two dogs, and then we'd go off to the gym together, and we'd get there by 6 and work out and then go to work. And finally, about 2 months ago, we decided that we could be trusted to go in the afternoon, right? And so now in the morning, I get a lot of my work done, my emails, things like that. And so that made a difference, but still I was having a hard time. And I realized that lack of motivation, and also I did testing, was from very low testosterone levels. All of that damaging lifestyle had just drained my testosterone. So I did a little more research and found some new products that are very good to increase testosterone. Simple things like pine pollen extract. And I doubled my testosterone level in a very short period of time. Felt a little better, but then I realized that I wasn't converting all the testosterone. So I then went back to the old herb, Dongkat Ali from Southeast Asia, which had been used more like as an aphrodisiac. But what it really does, it doesn't increase testosterone levels. It allows the testosterone that you have to be converted better. So then I started feeling better, and then I could work out more. And then I started taking some supplements, very safe things that, you might see a weightlifter using. And AJ, it was amazing. At 72, I was taught that you really can't do much to build muscle mass. Things are the way they are. I literally doubled my strength in 90% of the exercises I was doing in the gym. I had tons more energy. I'm no longer diabetic. I have no pain from the gout. Now, again, it's that combination that works so brilliantly. Western medicine saved my life. Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, etc., those principles are what allowed me to thrive. The Western medicine didn't help me thrive. It kept me alive. And so here I am. And I'm kind of getting out of the starting blocks a little early. The starter hasn't fired his pistol, but I have a book coming out at the beginning of next year that's the working title is Never, Ever, Ever Give Up. And that's my message, right? Never get up. If you're alive, then you can turn it around. So anyway, thank you for letting me ramble there.
No, I wanted to understand for myself, not only the audience. I was also listening to you very intently about your hospital visits, about your emergency room, about not being able to breathe, and about all the things that you did to be in good shape. And so I will certainly come to the book because that is also the name of the Never Ever Give Up. But before that, let me just understand it from a individual's point of view. Any person who is uh, not suffering severely or whatever problems they are in terms of health, what should they understand about never ever ever giving up? What would
Well,
you like to tell them?
I think that term applies to everything, right? Whether you're on a spiritual path, as your primary goal, if it's health, if it's you have a book that you want to write. I finally learned how to write last year. I hate writing. I can't stand writing, right? So I learned, but I love talking. So I talked the book and we had it transcribed, and Catherine and I put that together. We just sent another book to the editor yesterday. And so I finally, at 73 years old, figured out how to be a writer in a way that works for me. And then I hired a consultant, a coach, to help me with the next book that I'm writing, which is the Never, Ever, Ever Give Up, because it's the first two were more textbook type things. And so I don't have to be creative at all. And this one, I really want to get the story out there in a way that people can be moved by it. That's the key, because it's not, I'm the picture that they're looking at, but the book isn't about me. The book is about them. It's, are you really doing all that you set out to be? Are you fulfilling your purpose? And if you don't know what your purpose is, then find one and find it quick, right? Because without a purpose, you're just going to wander aimlessly. So I think that's my biggest takeaway for people is it's never too late. If you're breathing, it's never too late. I've seen miraculous turnarounds from conditions that doctors said couldn't be fixed. And so, like I said, never, ever, ever give up. If you got one more day, make sure it's fulfilled and fulfilling. So,
absolutely, well explained, Dr. John. Now, to understand from again the medicine, the Eastern medicine, the Western medicine. Long back, there was this poet who said about that East is West and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. But it met, and it met very strongly, very nicely. We are talking also along with the technology. We have met very well. We are talking and exchanging ideas.
Absolutely.
But in terms of medicine, why does it, instead of East and West, the medicine sometimes talks about East versus West? How should, from a patient's point of view, how should they make the best, whatever the opinion of different people at different places be, as a patient, how should they make the best of the power of East and West, the power of all sort of knowledge, medical knowledge that is available with us?
Well, I was very fortunate, right? Because I've been studying this for a long time and teaching it for a long time. So I was in kind of a unique position. But there are a lot of really good people out there that are very bright, very knowledgeable. A lot of them are doing telehealth now. And so there are people out there that are, a lot of people actually, that are combining these worlds, and they got bifurcated. I mean, the ideas of Western medicine are very recent. Like Chinese medicine, they outlined the entire circulatory system over 2,000 years ago. When they do dissections of cadavers, of the first 234 points that were checked, 233 of them were directly over major nerve bifurcations. So when you needle that point, it's doing the problem with people with acupuncture is they'll say, how does it work? And I'll say, how much time do you have for me to explain? Because it does so many different things. Just the act of putting a needle into the body. So the body has different layers, right? You've got your organs and the fascia and, the skin, etc. Well, those all have different electrical charges. And so just the act of putting a needle that connects through those really helps to balance and harmonize the electrical force in the body. And AJ, I remember my first day in my physics class, the teacher said if we took all of the actual matter in your body, it would fit in a thimble. The rest of it is all electromagnetic. And so it's like, wow. So we're 99.9% electromagnetic. Well, if we can balance those charges, right? So that's one way. But when you put a needle into the body responds by sending what many people call the soup, white cells, red cells, serotonin, ATP, all of these chemicals to help heal that area. And then when you also needle over the nerves, those nerves that we're needling, some are motor nerves. I can stick a needle in and make someone's foot move, or I can put a needle in that same point because a lot of the nerves are bundled. So they have a motor part section and also a sensory section that goes back to the brain. And the studies that have been done on looking at how to stimulate different areas of the brain. I now do a lot of stroke care. I was fortunate to have studied with literally the top stroke person in all of China. And out of their work, they've actually mapped out exactly what parts of the brain you can increase blood flow to by needling points on the arms, on the legs, and over the head. So I feel incredibly blessed. I'm here with these ancient, brilliant, wise ideas. And now we have all of this research coming in to show how we knew it worked, but now we see how it works and why it works. And so I just feel blessed to be here at the crossing point of that. You know, when I've studied in China a bit, and it's amazing what you see there. For example, I was one of the first Westerners to study the new traditional Chinese, or the Chinese treatments for diabetes. Now, I'm a member of the American Diabetes Association, and I get all these journals, and maybe 10% of the time they use the word cure. The other 90%, they use the term manage. They don't say that in China. In China, you are expected to stop being diabetic because it's a drain on the system, right? And so they have Diabetes Day. So every hospital that treats diabetics, once a month, all the patients come in, same day, they get their blood drawn, they watch a presentation on seasonal eating, they watch a presentation on diabetes in general, and they will have someone come up and do an exercise routine. The day I was there, they were teaching line dancing, right? Western line dancing. And so then, before people leave, there's a row of doctors, acupuncturists, herbalists, and they will get checked at each station. They just go down the row. Someone goes over their labs. If it's a man, they'll see a doctor, asking about a variety of functions. If it's a woman, they'll see a gynecologist, and then they'll see an herbalist, an acupuncturist, an exercise person, all in one day, half a day. And so that creates cohort, right? These people are all in there together, and they're kind of nudging each other, going, hey, let's go line dancing together tomorrow. And I'm not kidding, AJ. It was amazing. My son was blown away. He was a little tyke then. But we'd go out to the park, and you'd see a portable record player or radio, some type of music maker, and there'd be 30 or 40 women doing line dancing together. It was just amazing. And they'd go shopping together, and they'd cook together. And if we did that in the US, it would be a totally different problem. We wouldn't have the diabetes problem that we have.
Right. And in that system, you start passing the message that rather than looking at such things as something to be managed, rather something to be removed from your system, and then your mind starts perhaps working that way, and creating the necessary insulin, perhaps.
Yeah, decades ago, 45 years ago, I studied with a guy, Tony Robbins, who's really big in the US. He's a life coach, etc. And he had a great quote. He said, "The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions." So you can say, what's wrong with this? Or you can say, what's right with this? And your brain will go in different directions, right? And so it's that questioning, that curiosity, the openness. And that's what I think is really the key. Like when I sit down with a patient, as much as I can, I try to be kind of a blank slate, right? Just to get the impressions before I start talking.
Right. So one last question then I want to ask from you, Dr. John, is that as an individual, what sort of questions should they be asking themselves about their health rather than, and then asking to the doctor the right kind of question? How should I know what sort of health I am, even if I do not have any real sort of complaints? How should one look at their health in terms of understanding?
This is really a fresh thing for me because I just went through about 1,200 pages of research studies for this second book in a very short period of time. So it's like, I'm still a little frazzled from it. But one of the things is we, in most fields, right? I mean, you always have some open individuals, but in most fields, let me use myself as an example. So I started studying functional medicine 25 years ago. And I was told by my teachers that these certain lab values, which are much tighter values, much narrower than the Western medical values, are the right values. And I just took it, as, God said. And then one day it was like, well, how do I know they're right? And so I started researching it myself. And I found, fortunately, that in most cases they were right. But when I dug into the research, I was stunned. AJ, I was stunned at how much research is out there showing that the lab values that, on a typical lab done on your complete blood count and your chemistry, there were so many studies that showed that those values were wrong. They weren't even close. So I'll give you an example. There are, well, there's so many. I could give you hundreds of examples, but there are, for triglycerides, floating blood fats, which are very, very important. When your triglycerides start going up, usually you're getting more insulin resistant. Well, one of the major labs we use around here says you should be under 150. Functional medicine, we want you under 100, and under 70 is really good. So that's a pretty big difference. One of the major HMOs in our area, I almost fell out of my chair when I first saw this lab. They consider you normal if you're under 879. That's 9 times what I consider normal risk. And when you look at the mortality curves, right? So where you've got a U-shaped curve, and the bottom of the curve is where the lowest mortality. The mortality risk can be 10 times higher and still be in what are considered normal lab ranges. So the first thing I would do is recommend that someone pick up a book. It could be ours. It's cheap. It's on Amazon, but from somebody, and start looking at these lab values so that when you get your test and your doctor says, it's all fine, you can go ahead and look and go, well, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And then you can do a little more research. And the blessing and the curse is that everything's on the internet now, right? And so people go to Dr. Google, and sometimes that's problematic, right? But at least they can get a start there, right? And you've got so many wonderful, wonderful teachers teaching online now about these subjects. So that's what I would recommend, is read your labs for yourself, and then go online and find someone that's talking about those labs.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to understand more about yourself, and whatever someone else tells about you, you got to know a bit more. Do become almost half or quarter of a doctor yourself in that sense. And
Absolutely. You gotta have that knowledge, or be close to someone that has that knowledge, right? So my wife's family calls me weekly with questions when they get their labs done. So they don't have to learn a lot, but you either need to do it yourself or be close to someone, know someone that can do it for you.
right, right. I remember one of your friends told you that about going to an acupuncturist. Now, if I understand, your wife is an acupuncturist.
Yes.
So do you get much more acupuncture now? Now you are more comfortable with that?
I get more than I used to. In fact, my wife is the acupuncturist for the San Francisco 49ers football team. And they played last night, Monday night. They've had a horrible year, but she's so close to those players. I mean, if someone gets hurt, I mean, she's just, beside herself. So I do get some acupuncturists. Catherine Black, who I've been writing these books with, is also a very accomplished acupuncturist and is certified in functional medicine. So I'm much better than I used to be.
Wonderful. There's so much to learn from you, Dr. John, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to learn more from you, about your learn from your books. What's the best way for them to connect with you, Dr. John?
I would say go to, we have several websites, but the best one for this is thebalancingpoint.net. Thebalancingpoint.net. And that has old radio shows, it has podcasts, it has some courses that I've taught, and it has, ways to get in touch with me if they want to do that.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.